It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. Another podcast. Here we are.
A different intro.
We have a special guest. Podcasters, why don't you introduce yourselves first? And then I've written out a 10-minute introduction for our guests. So,
please.
Ooh, I love it. Hi, I'm Els Tahura.
Hi, I'm Chad Jetner.
I'm Peter Lawrence, and I'll be timing Kyle's introduction.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. And today we're going to talk about user research, which is why we're joined by Melanie Sorensen, our resident user researcher, who knows an incredible amount about user research. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you. Glad to be here talking about my favorite thing.
All right. So to kick it off, because I've been doing kind of front end stuff with SharePoint for years and things like that. So I've been doing user research in the form of surveys and interviews and things like that. But I never felt like I really knew completely what I was doing. I didn't have a ton of experience. So I was just curious in general about research, and it's a pretty broad topic. So I think if we talk about user research, it's going to give me what I need, which is really why we're here.
Sounds good.
What are kind of the core elements of user research?
Well, I think I'm going to lean on my absolutely favorite definition. Are you asking what user research is?
Yeah.
I am, because I still don't know.
Yeah, so I love usability.gov is a great website that has all sorts of user experience resources. And they have a quote that describes user research as, user research focuses on understanding user behaviors, needs, and motivations through observation techniques, task analysis, and other feedback methodologies.
Like it.
I think user research might be even a little bigger than that whole thing, but essentially it's about understanding users, what they do, what they want to do, how they do it, context, and then figuring out when it comes to our products and services, what is it that they actually need from us? What can we do to help serve them and meet their needs? My favorite thing about user research is it tells us exactly what we need to work on, which I think is a big question, like what if you didn't have to guess what you needed to do? And what if you didn't have to argue with all the leaders over what needed to be done? And users can help us in that way, because once you get this great picture of how a person works and interacts with your product or service, it becomes pretty clear what, maybe the big issues are that you need to resolve, or the next features and functionality that you need to create. I think I went off topic on definition there, but
My thoughts since we started talking about this topic kind of drifted to, how well do we really know our people, in an organization? How well do we understand, the people we're working with, the people we're serving as, technology folks and whatnot. And we're kind of just flying by the seat of our pants, working with people all day, but we're not studying like them and what they do and how they do it and why they do it. So I'm like, wow, we really are flying blind in a lot of ways. I just assume that I know best.
I think my comeback to that is, we are not our user. We are not our user. We are not our user.
The three pillars of user experience design, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. You're saying we're flying by the seat of our pants, and if you aren't doing user research, I can see how that would be the case, and that's a little scary. But that's why, the whole practice of user experience came to life, is because we can create this design and build cycle that includes testing. So it gets our user input, it gets our user validation, so that, we don't have to fly by the seat of our pants. And, there is no UX without the user. If you're not involving your user, you're just doing design. And design is great. We can make great things with design, but why not be sure? Why not validate? Why not, learn more?
So,
Sorry. I
go
was
ahead,
just
Al.
going to say, I always think that curiosity is like one of the key qualities that is like the most necessary thing for a user experience professional. Because if we aren't curious about the people and the world around them, how are we really going to figure out what it is that they need and is going to bring them joy, essentially?
So I was thinking, in what's sort of a stereotypical, more on the end of worst case scenario, it's like, we don't need to bring in design. We're going to lump design in with user research. And that's going to come in at the very end of a project. But from what you're describing and really understanding the user, it seems like in a best case, or at least better case, user research would be coming in right away and kind of partnering with those product owners who might have particular changes that they want to implement. And so as they're looking at things maybe more from the business perspective of, we need to move in this direction to grow as a company, is that sort of where user research can come along in parallel to say, all right, well, if we're going to go in that direction, this is the kind of change we need to have, or this is the type of interaction we'd need to promote. Like, is it fair to say, like, we'd want user research to come in as early as possible?
Definitely. And I think you brought up a couple interesting things, which is, number one, the product owner is actually like key user advocate number one.
Oh, okay.
So they are generally a user researcher's, I guess I should say the user researcher is generally the right hand of the product owner for getting information to help supplement what they already know about the users and their needs. And so I think it kind of depends on where you are with your user knowledge and where you are with your product about how deep of an initial discovery engagement you need to do. If you're really looking at, well, say you have a product that has issues, you're getting a lot of complaints, you're not understanding why these things are happening. Maybe you're looking at the analytics and you're like, why are people going to this page? Why don't they visit this page? Things like that. I mean, that's kind of like a red flag that says, hey, we got to go find out why. Why is this stuff happening? And so, maybe that's not like a true beginning of the project discovery, but it's like, hey, let's pause, let's see where we are. Let's go do some testing with users. So usability tests of the current product potentially. I love to weave in discovery questions when we're doing that. So a lot of times, yes, we will do the work of coming up with a flow or using an existing design, and we make assumptions because we have to make assumptions many times. And so it's just, if we can identify those assumptions, we can actually create a script where we have time to both verify the use of the interface, but verify the assumptions that went into it. And then if we found out one of those assumptions was wrong, we can dig deep spontaneously to kind of figure out, okay, where did we go wrong? What do we really need to know? And that's a great thing to do when you're trying to figure out, hey, my satisfaction score is way lower for some reason. We can just talk to users and they can bring up issues. But I do think when you're starting on new endeavors, new features, new functionality, new products, it's really, really helpful to, get into the life of their user. I think in the ideal world, you'd be following them around and potentially asking them, recording and asking questions later. But generally these days, we're doing most of our research remotely. And so we will come up with 1-hour scripts and sets of activities that we will run those users through to make sure to answer a set of predetermined questions that are in our research plan. And you can learn a lot by just asking somebody like, hey, so what do you do before you have to go to the grocery store? When do you make your list? How do you make your list? Like we want to figure out how we can make it easier for them to shop or something like that. And when we find out, they put notes on their phones, but then those notes are like, not in the, they're upset because they're not in the order of the way the store is laid out. Well, maybe we can figure out a way to have them enter in items and we can order them a list as they go through the store or something like that. So, we need to know where are those pain points. That's a huge part of user experience is, what hurts, but as well understand the joy and make sure that you don't lose it.
So, over the last 12 years or so, I've seen the reluctance to do things like user experience and usability and, that kind of stuff. It's gone up. It's more widely accepted now, and I think more widely understood. But I think there's still a reluctance to do that. It still doesn't seem like a critical part of the project for some people, and where you still want to put the week of user acceptance testing at the end of the project when all your developers are going to be leaving, and then that 5 days gets turned into 3 days because you went over your time.
Just a little bit behind.
Yeah. So, and the idea of, okay, we got to involve the business early. IT cannot be a white tower, ivory tower that just hands down solutions and things like that. So, getting involved with the business and all of those things have become, they were always critical. They were always important. So I think we're probably getting better at building systems and things like that because we're starting to do more and more user testing. At one point, I did some persona development, and where you're basically creating D&D character sheets for each type of person that you identify within your organization. But I wasn't quite sure how to how you would use that. I read that you handed it to a developer and that helps them know the people and keep them in mind when they're doing their work. How do you make that connection? How would you use those things and find value?
Well, I know you're bringing up personas because I have admitted they are not my favorite thing. And it's actually not that personas are bad, because when done right, when done with user research to inform them, they are very effective in creating empathy for a user. And that's why we use them on Teams.
Okay.
But I've just seen so many groups that sit down together and just make things up. This is Molly, and, she loves 80s
Spreadsheets.
music. I don't know, and what good does that do when you actually can say like, hey, this is a farmer, he's managing, 8 plots of land, and at a certain point his corn's going to get so high that he actually can't walk, he has this many acres and it would take him, 2 weeks to walk all of those acres. So there's no way he's going to see his acres. So how do we help him, know what's going on in his fields, especially once the corn gets so high that he's actually going to get cut going into the field to go see it. I mean, we can, just by doing some user interviews, you can actually inform those profiles. And I generally actually create what I call data profiles or user profiles, because it's using data and information we have about our customers or about our clients, bringing that in, especially if we know that, like, say, a certain group is of a younger age, a certain group is an older age. You can look at, like, for employees, when you're doing, intranets or things like that, you can figure out people in different roles have, different computer savviness. And that's an important thing that we can write about that persona, that user profile, whatever term we use. And we may approach our designs differently when we do that.
Melanie, can I ask you really quick? Yeah. In your role, like, is there a clear delineation between user research and, like, persona mapping, or are they just kind of wishy-washy terms that, because you seem vehemently opposed to personas?
Well, just if you do them fake. If you fake them.
Oh, okay.
If you're trying to define who the personas are without any context, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're just making it up, like, you're empathizing with your fake user. Like, do you really know anything? Like, no.
So you've done your research. Go ahead.
But to answer Chad's question, I think this kind of gets into who should do research and who should do user experience, and, where does research fit, where do personas fit? And the fact is, many UXers are UXers of one, as we call them. And that means that they need to wear all the hats. They need to do the research. They need to do the information architecture. They need to be able to create prototypes in various fidelities. They need to be designers. And that's not ideal, because there are specialists in all of those areas that can work on some of those things. I mean, I would say it's not that it's not ideal. It's a unicorn that you're looking for. Whereas some of us have had the opportunity to dive deep in different specialties. So, I am a full stack UXer. I came from a graphic design background. I have an MBA. I have a real weird combination of experience. I've done code systems. But I have gotten to dive into research, and that is my specialty and focus right now. And so I hear a lot of times from leaders, well, everyone should do research. And it's like, okay, do you want everyone to code your website?
No,
I don't.
No. And I've now done 2 surveys of 2 different pretty large design groups, or, medium-sized design groups. And I have found that the UX designers or the product designers are actually more interested in consuming the research, which is good. They need to be consuming that information versus actually performing it themselves, because they understand it takes a specialized skill set. So yes, you can enable people to do testing, and there's, like, short-term, there's certain products you can work with where you can do short-term testing overnight, validating people can find things. There's definitely simple things that you can do, but for this deep discovery research, it really helps to work with a professional. So, who does the persona? Well, if I have a designer that's working with me as a researcher, and I've done the research on who this individual is, heck yeah, I'm going to let them design it. But if I don't have that individual, I'm going to create it myself. And, it's, you do what your specialties allow.
Yeah.
So jumping back to something you'd said earlier, you talked about at the beginning of a project, it's great to have, that user data collected and everything. But you also said, when I'm adding a feature to an existing product, that's also a great time to do that. And I guess most of us think, well, Yeah, it'd be great when we're starting, but we've already passed that so long ago. We need to give up on that and just forget about it. And you're saying that's not true.
Well, I don't know. I feel like there are points in the product cycle where you're making a shift. So sometimes what happens is there is a tool that is going to be changed in the back end. It's going to be switched out, but it means a lot of things have to be touched. And that's the perfect time to think about making these UX improvements. So that's when it makes sense to do this research. But also the other side of your question really is, okay, so we're in a product and we're continually making these small iterational changes. Well, the same thing for that, you have a roadmap. You know what's coming up, that the user experience designer and a researcher, if they're involved, should be looking ahead at that roadmap, working ahead of it to find out what needs to be found from the user perspective, just the same way as the product owner is doing the same thing, but always also looking at the business and other needs across the organization. And development is looking at back-end systems and supporting those things. Everybody's kind of doing the research beforehand to inform the work once it starts. And generally UX does work 1 to 2 sprints ahead, the design. Okay. So the research needs to happen before that. And I will be honest, I have never seen an agile setup where it's worked perfect.
Right.
Super awesome. So like, if anybody does have the perfect situation, please invite me to watch, because I want to know what you do.
So shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah.
You've done your research at whatever stage, getting ready for the next stage, and you got everything together. What do you hand off to the developers? How do you transition that information to the developers so that they can utilize that, or end designers, the people building and shaping the system? What do you hand off to them?
And maybe if I can add on really quick, like how often do you find your role as a UX researcher transition into just you're the BA now?
Oh, I have been complimented on my BA skills.
I know. I only ask that because I worked with UX researchers who become better than dedicated BAs on a project. And I don't know if I've just dealt with a lot of aberrations or if that's just like what you folks tend to do, like where your role tends to gravitate once you start off the research phase.
Yeah. Though, we're doing our jobs best if we're delegating some of that technology investigation to our BAs and to our system analysts. And, so I think there's like a lot of things the BAs do, but we are organized. But I think we started with, were we talking about handoffs?
Yeah.
So, what do you give them?
Yeah, so when I do research, I am actually doing a report at the end, and my report always has an executive summary where it has key observations and key recommendations. And those recommendations are kind of twofold. Like, number one, they need to be written in such a way that a designer that can balance all of the recommendations to come up with the right design solution. They have to be open in that way, but they also have to be specific enough that people are coming out of my research and they know what to build, and they know where the problem areas are that need to be investigated. And usually I am giving, it's like, hey, we should investigate a new term, and then I will have gone and done my research about the industries use this term, but leaving that flexibility for if somebody really needs to push back. Well, okay, we're still doing a new term because people don't understand this, or, this is where it should be. But then if the team realizes, oh, but we're going to be adding 10 more pages to that section, maybe that's not where it needs to be, if that's something that I don't know already. And so I'm handing off my report. And actually this gets into something that I'm super passionate about, which is kind of higher level of in a UX, in an organization that does UX, which is research repositories. So I have been creating research repositories in Confluence when I'm working with JIRA organizations, Atlassian organizations. So I will actually have a page per study, and I have the actual research report, but I'm bringing up, the key findings in there, and then I've come up with this taxonomy system to tag all of these different research reports. And so what I can do after I have a critical mass of research, which happens quickly, I can actually do studies across studies and come up with insights about the research that's been performed so far. And that's one of the things I kind of piggybacking on some of the earlier conversation is that you begin, once you start your user research journey, like you begin to see patterns and you can answer questions because you already know them. And so then you're just kind of like increasing your knowledge versus, maybe at the beginning you have to talk to more users, you have to discover more things, but eventually it's like, nope, our users want this. This is how they're approaching it. This is the environment they're in when they do it. These are the devices they use. You know all that stuff. So then you just get in the nuance of like, okay, well, can they actually get through these screens we put together or something like that? And then, once there's some sort of innovation in the industry, then how are we fitting that in and things like that. But the research repository is just like a blessing because it's like anybody can go in and search what they want. There's key terms, you can find all the studies. I would love to be using a tool to do this. There's a local company called Aurelius that has research repositories. But you can also just make your own on Confluence, probably on SharePoint, to house all that information. And it can be little stuff. Like literally you could do one web analytics poll. So you just have a little spreadsheet and maybe a couple, numbers that came out of that spreadsheet. So some little picture and you can put that in there. And then people can go in and find that information. And ideally, you're getting others to contribute to this research repository. So recently, I was working on a client where I did this, and we started this competitors page because there was a lot of change going on in the industry, is a lot of consolidation, a lot of competitors, like startups coming out of nowhere. And so I think one of my most popular pages was the competitors page, and I didn't have to do a thing because everybody would come in and they would add the new company in, or they would rename it when it got renamed, or they would consolidate it and put all that information. And so it became the like one source for them. And then they could also see, oh, hey, another study's been added.
Nice.
So, do you ever pull in developers in the process of doing user research, or is it you just hand off stuff at the end?
Well, I'd love to turn that question around and ask if you guys have been involved in user research.
Yeah, quite a bit.
And what was your involvement?
We were, almost from the get-go, discovery phase for me on a couple of different projects now. And I think depending on I'm a lead on projects. And for me to get context around what UX does and be able to relay that back when we actually start to form actionable stories based on the research, it helps a lot. Because like what you say is true, even with user research, developers tend to go, well, that's stupid, we're not doing that. And if I'm...
Is that true? Do they say that?
They do all the time.
Oh, no.
Yes. Oh, yeah. All the time. But if somebody, a representative of the development team is around for that as well, like it helps the dev community side of a project. It helps articulate it differently, right? And it helps eliminate rework a lot, right? Because sometimes developers will take a path to get to this crystal palace that our UX researcher has designed for us. And it doesn't always match up perfectly. And we will in our heads just continually make shortcuts to get there, right? Based on timelines and pressure and blah, 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 whatever. But if somebody's around to go through that journey with you guys, we can kind of eliminate that a bit early on. Like either in our code review process or in our planning process or whatever. I think maybe. I don't know, Peter, what do you think?
I agree. My favorite part of that process, especially when you're working on some internal project for a company, is being able to talk directly to the people that are going to use the software. It's such an advantage that, to take advantage of it or to ignore it is such a waste. Like, talk to the person that's going to use the software, because they may or may not have the same idea that you do, right? And
yeah,
I know kind of spin this a little bit is in the past, in the waterfall days of software development, you'd go off onto your island, you'd build your software, you'd come and deliver it to the users, and then you'd get to watch them try to use it, and you just tear your hair out when they do things that were just so unexpected, so hard to watch.
And actually being part of that from the beginning, just building the rapport with the users. So like in my world, when we're prototyping something, right? Like, all right, we got to get this out there. There's 100 different ways to get to the Crystal Palace. Let's figure out which one's going to work. Actually having a relationship with the actual people that are going to be using your thing is immense for the iterative process to, be able to show it. Like, is this good? Is this not good? Am I off base? We know what the design is. We know what the research says, but
So have you had like pre-recruited sets of users that you could tap whenever you wanted to? Is that how it worked? Or was it just the fact you kept going back and 2 different users to try things out?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Some of them are pre-recruited. A lot of them I recruit at happy hours. We spend quite a bit of those with our users. So it's a little column A, a little column B, and yeah, it's just
sometimes a little bit more back channel than you'd want, right? A little bit more back channel than you'd expect at an organization. Be like, yeah, I'll just go show my favorite user this and get their feedback on this, rather than I'm going to get a group of 10 people to complain about this work for 30 minutes.
I don't know. The word back channel has so many negative connotations, but it's not even really that. It is in Melanie's case, if you're not part of the entire software product thing, and maybe that's a question, are you typically part of that? But if we have our UX done and then hand off, and then then it goes to us, having a rapport with the actual end users and having that back channel, I guess, with them speeds things up so fast, right? I hate committee design nonsense where you get 10 people in and everybody tries to come to an understanding of what we can live with. It sucks. Melanie, am I pissing you off right now? Is this all horrible?
No, it's just giving me a lot of things that I could share.
Oh,
I have a question for Al.
Yeah, Melanie, go for it.
So one of the things that you're making me think of is I am a huge proponent of what I call feedback teams, which is kind of a diverse, representative group of users that you recruit, so that if you need to send out those quick unmoderated tests, you have people that have opted in to do this information. A lot of times people will opt in for free because, even if a client tells you, hey, we can't talk to users, they love it. Clients love it. They feel valued. They feel like their voice is being heard, and they get to influence products because they're your client for a reason. They're actually really passionate. I've met some, you'd think you'd meet a lot of people that would just be like yelling at you and mad, but that just isn't the case. They want their voice to be heard because they want things to get better. They're actually like a partner in this process. So having those pre-recruited teams is good. Now, it is also good to get designs at certain times in front of new people that aren't part of the process. But another thing that I've seen in technology organizations is actually having these kind of like user groups or super users, councils, depending on like who it is. Like, maybe it's like all the nurse leaders come together once a month. And so then technology can come in and bring things and get feedback. Now, that's not user testing, that's getting feedback stuff. There's only been one situation. Well, that's not true, but one key situation so far where I've done multiple users testing at the same time, and that was nurses, because they would work together to solve the problem that we were testing. And so we would get together groups if they worked in that group. But most of the time we are meeting with people one-on-one because if that was the way that they were using the product or service, we would want to be true to that. Otherwise, you're kind of doing more like market research. I mean, it depends. There's shades therein, but I think there's a lot of different ways you can start as an organization with research. And here's my pro tip. You have an organization that's super regulated, finance, healthcare. Find your marketing people. Find them and ask them, how do you send out messages to your customers? And you're going to learn those regulating bodies within the company. And then remember, you're doing research. You're not doing marketing. So like with finance, there's a lot of rules about what you can say when you're marketing. But when you're doing research, you're kind of doing more service messaging. And so you're kind of in a different category. And you will be able to come up with a process where you can actually, this is how I pull a list of customers. This is how I get it approved, or I screen out the wrong people. This is who I show my survey language to, and get it edited or approved or whatever. This is where I file it nationally so that I meet regulations. I mean, it's very possible, and making those friends in marketing, making those friends in legal, like it's a start. You have to find them first, but
makes things go smoothly.
Yeah, it totally does. It's possible. And if you're working with an internal audience, like for intranets, for SharePoint sites, things like that, go to the lunchroom. Just start bringing little things to people. Hey, do you have 2 minutes to do this? And, start doing click tests or asking questions, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of, have people recommend different SMEs across the organization to give you input. One of my favorite sources is anyone that's already in contact with customers. So our support centers, they are getting calls all day long, and oh my gosh, do they want to help you fix the thing so they don't have to tell somebody again to reset their password or whatever it is that's like super annoying. Like, they're great. Some people will have more numbers than others, so they might be able to actually tell you, hey, these are our top 10, top 25 issues. But I've actually sat down with service teams and gone through those issues, and like sometimes it's immediately obvious, oh my God, this is a total UX fail. I'm going to go get the team to fix this thing, and this is going to go off your list. And other things require more digging, but
I feel like every ticketing system is a UX failure, but that's just my bias.
Melanie, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10,
yes.
How mad at us do you get when we don't follow perfectly the UX guidelines that you put out there? When we screw up your research, when we say we're the user and we know better, how livid? Like just like.
I just don't have that happen.
Okay.
And the developer's not the one screwing it up usually, right? It would be a leader putting some sort of political pressure on a team to do the thing, right? But usually we're creating these stories that it's just like so clear what's going on that the question isn't whether we should do it, it's when. When does it make sense to do this? You know, like,
Yeah.
we can't do everything right now, but knowing where you're going can help you make development decisions that allow you to expand or contract into that future vision versus, you know, not knowing. You'd make a choice without realizing you've tied your hand.
All I can
Yeah.
think of is like, and even when something goes wrong and it doesn't go the way you'd recommend, it's like, it's not that you're mad, it's that you're disappointed. because
That's worse.
because it's like, okay, if you want to drive people away, then great, but like, it's genuinely not in our interest to go against what the user research says.
Yeah. Well, I disappoint myself a lot because a lot of times I will insist that we put certain things in the research study to validate, because I'm like, this is going to be a usability issue. Like, this is a problem. People aren't going to find this thing. They aren't going to know to click on it, da 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 da. And then we put it in and, oh, wow, they all pass. Darn. You know, so like, I think the way UX works and why I loved making that transition from design to UX was the assumption of failure. I know a lot and take my best stab at coming up with this idea, but I'm going to test it because I know something's going to be wrong. So if you assume that you're going to fail, then it just becomes a part of like, okay, well, how much am I, what is it I need to fix and how? And I just feel like it's this huge relief, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're
It's a
gonna
whole different
fail.
expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like that's nice. But yeah, I get frustrated because, man, developers, they just can't release everything at once. Catch up. It takes so long.
We're there with you.
We had some conversations earlier in the week, and a few things stood out to me. And one is, like, the biggest thing is that you can know things. It's not a guessing game. It's not, what would you do? It's, you can find out and you can know things, and then you can proceed based on what you know and have it work.
Yep.
And serve the users. So when you go in and you start doing user research and you start reporting out, do you see people that kind of were not totally engaged, maybe not convinced? Do you see the lights come on for them?
Oh man. I mean, I guess I usually I'm coming in because people already know there is a value, but don't they know they need info. They know that research is going to do it. They might not know where. And what happens after that first study is okay, this is amazing. Like, this is super helpful. I am going to share this with my leaders. They need to know this information. And okay, now can we test this? And let's test this. And hey, what about this? And a lot of times it's like, yes, yes, yes. But then my job quickly morphs into we don't need to test that. You need to just say no to that terrible UX, the thing that breaks all the UX rules. And you need to say no to the leader that told you to do that because of this UX principle. And we don't need to test that. We know, things like that. So yeah, I think it's just super fun to see, to do this work with teams and to give them this kind of like catalyst for them to come up with all these ideas. And then we start validating these ideas. And as this becomes part of your process, you start finding that people can actually kind of predict this is going to work. Not always.
And then do you get roped in then? It's like, we started doing research for this project. It's been going well. We're learning all this stuff. And all of a sudden you find yourself after that project, now you're doing user research to improve the parking ramp. and then they have you in the cafeteria. Like, do you get sucked into a lot of other things too?
I haven't gotten sucked into the parking ramp yet. But yes, definitely, because the studies, the research that we do always has an impact beyond just the project at hand. It's always impacting some other tool as well, some other user, some other part of the experience or some other touch point for the company. And so then we start having bigger conversations, and we start collecting information so that we understand that your user profile, as we were talking about, we understand the environment. Maybe we do some experience maps, journey maps for them. And then what happens is you've created these resources that other teams can come in and leverage and see, oh, we're working on this right here. They've just done this thing. Let's look at that experience and how are we going to seamlessly get them to do this part, And so, yes, I feel like the research becomes more global. But it also can just be like, hey, let's resolve. I have all these leaders. Everyone wants us to do all these things in Q1. What am I going to do? Oh, hey, why don't we let's do a survey back to, all the sales reps and see what they say. They've asked for 40 things, but what's the most important? It's kind of, you think of creative ways to get questions answered, get things focused.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for being here. I've learned so much in just the last week and in the last hour. Do you have any parting thoughts before we shut it down for the day?
I think the one thing that I really wanted to mention is that I prefer it when an entire team and all roles are engaged in research. So, we can do planning and make sure that if the developers have questions, that they get included in our plan and therefore in the test, but also that our developers can watch, if we're interviewing, that they can watch those sessions and that they're engaged. I do a high levels finding session the day after we do a bunch of usability tests or user interviews. And so anyone who's watched at least one session comes together when we map out what worked, what worked but needed tweaks and what doesn't work. And then we come up with some next steps from the user perspective. And it's really great when you can get cross-functional teams that are doing all that work. But, even doing some kind of activities, whiteboarding activities at the beginning with all the development, I just think it's really critical to have that expertise in there when you're also, thinking about the user experience, because you need to make it work. It needs to be feasible. And we don't get that without the developers in there. So I hope everybody engages. Is my ask, my challenge for you as we wrap up this session.
Awesome. Any other thoughts?
It's never too late to start, but start at the beginning if you can.
Peter, there is such a thing as being too late.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Melanie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And everybody else for being here.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we'll say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Everybody.
Goodbye. Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.